software, easily installable, and it is very explicit about what those applications are going to do in terms of permissions. And Google has, I think, gotten a little bit better about that recently, but F-Droid, I think, in some ways led the way on that, telling you what kinds of permissions, whether it's using non-free resources. So, for example, you install, say, Telegram, free software and a build of Telegram from F-Droid, but it's going to tell you it's going to use some non-free network services. So it basically is a great resource. And you can also get like an APK, or you can build it yourself. In contrast, when we started working with LibreOffice on iOS, it was challenging. We obviously had to slim down the core code, but it was a restricted platform, and it was really tricky to get people testing builds and so forth. Apple literally holds all the keys. Another challenge that we faced along the road towards LibreOffice Online was that every build had been platform specific, that iOS builds, Android builds, and so forth. If we didn't have a specific motivated user base or a backer for a lot of money, you weren't going to get LibreOffice on that platform. So, for example, even with Solaris, which was one of the first operating systems that was being supported with OpenOffice.org, again, Solaris being a Sun product, we now really don't have a lot of people interested in Solaris, it being a shuttered project with new versions coming out. But who's going to set up and maintain a build mod for that? That's one of the key ways you can get platform supported. In Android, we made an Android port, but it's difficult. There's a new UI. I don't know if you guys have tried to do Android testing between different operating system revisions and so forth. It's a headache. It's absolutely horrible. And say Chrome OS, I use a Chromebook and a Chromebox with Ubuntu. It's like an Ubuntu sort of sideload onto it for demoing and so forth. But at times I would love to be able to show people something on their Chromebook, on their resource, and LibreOffice just doesn't run on OS currently. So the great thing is most sane consumer devices right now have a browser, right? They have a reasonable tool for accessing anything that can be written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, there's a number of resources out there right now like Google Docs that you can use to get something that can manage your Office documents, but a lot of you still want to maintain control over your data and be able to have control over what people are seeing and who's accessing those resources. So the easy answer right now is code. So this is the easiest way for you guys to access LibreOffice. What is LibreOffice Online, essentially? So I can sort of break this down a little bit. Collabora is a consultancy in the UK, and they do a lot of LibreOffice development. And they have an Office suite that they're working on, sort of additions and improvements. They're working on for LibreOffice, and they've combined that with OwnCloud. Are you guys familiar with what OwnCloud is, generally speaking? So it's a great way for you to both store your documents, edit them, and so forth. Right now, this is just targeted at developers, technical folks, probably most of the people in the room, and you can just grab a OpenSUSE VM file. Again, it's like a CD size, 700 megabytes. If you go to Collabora's website there. So people keep on asking me, what's the plan with LibreOffice Online? Right now, Collabora and OwnCloud have a partnership. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and they're working on a commercial solution. I don't have an exact date. I've heard things about the middle of the year, but I don't know. One of the great things about what Collabora is doing is they're pushing their changes, their improvements into the upstream project. And I don't work for Collabora, but I wanted to give them a bit of a shout out specifically because they have done so much hard work and are providing that in this great VM for people. They're the primary contributor to LibreOffice Online. They've done amazing improvements to LibreOffice. We're a heavy developer on LibreOffice for Android, and are pushing those changes very openly with the community. They have this sort of open first guideline, which I think is a great model, them being a great role model for others in the community. Because if you're looking at something that's on LibreOffice Online, whereas historically we had desktop and mobile versions, if you guys are familiar with copyleft licenses, one of the things is that when we're moving towards an online environment, if people are making changes to LibreOffice Online, making changes to some of that code, they are not legally obligated to share that per some of our copyleft licenses, the LGPL and MPL. And so one of the things that Collabora has done and other contributors have done is been to share their changes with everybody in the community. So I think that that's something that we're going to need to consider going forward with LibreOffice Online, making sure that we are building a vibrant community where everybody is participating. So current features in development, the juicy stuff. We have support for word processing, spreadsheets, presentations, and one of the sort of best selling points, I think, for LibreOffice Online, which is that you're avoiding file format compatibility issues when you're keeping things in the cloud. So if you have a system of, you have a company of 1,000 employees, and you have 500 of those people who just need very simple Office suite requirements, they can likely just use LibreOffice Online in the browser. They can just access those documents. Those developers I was talking about that rarely need to use an Office suite could potentially just have LibreOffice and push their documents up to it. Of course, if they're geek, they're probably going to have LibreOffice already on their desktop. And anyone else in the company who needs something a little heavier, who wants some more of the features currently implemented on the desktop, could use LibreOffice there as well. And because of the consistent code base, you're going to see a lot more higher fidelity of rendering between the online version and the desktop version. Now, unfortunately, I ran into a couple of issues trying to get the VM working for you guys. Trying to do some updates on the wireless network here. But I do have some quick screenshots to show you of just what the interface is looking like and some of the documents. So this is just a docx file with an image and some layout, heading, and so forth. And the rendering, based on the LibreOffice engine, is quite good. You know, for example, an Impress presentation. I was hoping to give my presentation in LibreOffice Online maybe the next time. You can see it renders the content very well and is very high fidelity. Here's I think some resume example and presentations. Charts, for example, in terms of linking of data and so forth. I think that there's a great opportunity for people who are interested in development to take some of the LibreOffice Online tools and extend them far beyond what other tools have done in terms of, let's say, Google Docs and so forth. Someone was asking me, how is LibreOffice Online going to distinguish itself? And I thought about a lot of different ways in which we could, including providing better linking of data, better ways of using the interface. At least for me, I much prefer working with my hands on a keyboard and just mousing around a lot. So I thought that, especially for people who felt that was a much more way to be more productive, get less wrist strain, that maybe LibreOffice Online could take the forefront in better ways to use these online applications. So I'll jump ahead here really quickly. Here we go. So building the code. So building the code is really easy. The amusing thing when I was talking to a couple of the developers recently, and they said, building the code, you should just grab the VM, and I thought that was kind of a silly thing at first, but I remember some of the first times when I was starting to work on computers and tweaking things, and I was talking to some of the Sugar Labs people actually recently. One of the best ways to get people engaged is to lower the barrier to changing code or making improvements to zero. And it's true, if you have a live VM and you can go in and tweak the JavaScript directly, if you can go in and tweak any aspect of the application without having to download and install and build all these pieces, then that's going to be essentially almost a thin line barrier to getting started making improvements. So again, if you feel super lazy, just grab the VM and test it out. Otherwise, you can grab the LibreOffice Online code from our Git repo up on freedesktop.org, and the ownCloud pieces are on GitHub. And if you are interested in making contributions, you can send your contributions. Probably the easiest way with LibreOffice is to hop on the development mailing list and ask for some help. But if you're familiar with Garrett, you can start using Garrett directly, pushing patches up and pushing patches to OwnCloud via GitHub. So testing and QA is near and dear to my heart, being a QA engineer for a while. And so testing in this environment is a little bit interesting and tricky. You know, obviously high-quality feedback is really greatly appreciated, and I'm really interested in hearing how you guys are interested in using LibreOffice Online and what kinds of environments, what kinds of devices you're going to be testing it out on. I felt slightly compelled to mention that if people, again, I really would like to hear feedback from you being technical audience, because I hear from a lot of people who often have a very verbose amount of content to say and not much actual content because they whine a lot. So this is sort of, I guess, an appeal to you to have your feedback concise, to the point, because we get a lot of feedback that lacks substance, and I think that you would be a great audience, and everyone at Scale would be a great audience to give us precise feedback about you know, problems in the code. If you're interested in doing QA, we have a Bugzilla instance we use for all of our LibreOffice Online and LibreOffice for Android bugs. Please take a look at all the open bugs. I think it's a very short list right now. I want to say it's 50 or so. So please take a quick look, and please give us some feedback. Filing new bugs is very much appreciated to help promote and move the development of LibreOffice Online forward faster. So what needs testing? I really would like to hear from people who are have a number of things like templates or other consistent documents, timesheets, and so forth across your institution. I'd love to work with you to help you, again, have your company try out LibreOffice Online. I think it's going to be a low barrier for companies to try out LibreOffice who otherwise wouldn't use the desktop version of LibreOffice. And if you see any differences between the rendering LibreOffice Online and the desktop, again, fonts and things might be a slight issue, but if you see some major issues, I'd love to hear about that. And for speakers, are there a number of speakers here? Who's speaking at Scale? Anybody? Yes. So I'd love for you guys to try it out with your presentations and give feedback to see if it's working for you or if there are any features, because I would love to see perhaps in the next Scale to have people presenting directly from LibreOffice Online as a little dog fooding exercise. So I'd love to get that feedback from you. So in terms of you know, getting your company or your organization to try out LibreOffice Online, there are, I think, a number of critical environments in which tools that you completely control are important. So if we're talking about healthcare situations that are required to treat patient data under HIPAA rules, confidentiality rules, or if you operate a law firm or otherwise work with legal data, you're going to have some strict compliance to data security rules or face huge fines. I was actually just talking to someone who works with healthcare data, and LibreOffice Online, I think, in terms of deployment, you have a lot of choices. It could obviously be deployed in a cloud hosted by a third party, or you could host it locally, you know, on a server that's even air-gapped if necessary. And because of the license and because of your flexibility and how you source your technical support from whom, you can have someone audit the code if necessary and so forth to make sure that you have a tool that is, you know, perfect for business, for productivity documents, but again, can be as secure as it needs to be for you. So I think that's the end of my talk. But I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any questions, or if you have any suggestions about how we can improve LibreOffice Online, or getting started with it. So, in the end, yeah. Sure, yeah. You gotta go. No.
I do work at a hospital.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to use something like that. Is the security controls for LibreOffice, is that built in?
Right, right. Sorry, I don't know. I'll repeat the question. So you work at a hospital, and you're wondering about integration of security and so forth. So right now, you break it, you get to keep both pieces. Demo I believe LibreOffice is being connected as sort of a plugin with OwnCloud, and so things like access control and so forth are all through what's going on with OwnCloud. I'm not sure how people are deploying OwnCloud right now. Again, I believe there are some plugins and so forth for authentication you can use with it, but my suggestion, especially in a hospital, would be to, you probably would keep stuff behind a VPN or behind a firewall with a VPN for people to access from outside and so forth. I don't know. Again, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. LibreOffice on the desktop, partially because of the nature of its history and so forth, aside from the ability to encrypt individual files, doesn't have any security baked into it. And so as far as I know right now, LibreOffice Online doesn't have any extra security added onto it.
So what they create online, are they saving locally? Or does it stay on?
It stays online, yeah. Right now it does. Yeah, so that's the integration with OwnCloud. Are you familiar with OwnCloud? So for those who don't know, hello? There you go. I was cut off. Time out. Yeah. The music should play me off. For those who don't know, OwnCloud is a cloud-based document storage and editing. Okay, we good? Hopefully I'm not breaking my microphone. So right, it's for cloud-based storage of documents and some basic editing. With that coupled with LibreOffice Online, right, everything can live in the cloud as much as you'd like. Of course, for security, secure data like HIPAA data, I'm sure there are questions about browser cache and so forth, that you need to address. But at least in terms of security of data, I can imagine that if you say disable the ability to save locally, and a couple other pieces about clearing cache, I feel like you could create a pretty secure setup. I'd say like bulletproof, but pretty secure setup so that people couldn't, generally speaking, accidentally leak data. So right here. Oh, microphone. Great. My microphone works.
My question is,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're not using local storage, so is there any kind of multi-user support similar to Etherpad?
Right. So collaborative editing is what you're asking about, yeah. So as far as I know, that support hasn't been merged in yet, and that's something that we do definitely want to add. I don't work for Collabra, so I don't know, but I guess that probably would be released around the time of commercial release. Mid-year, but again, that's a guess completely. That's a big one, and I think that for people who are currently using something like Etherpad, so for those who don't know, Etherpad is basically like a text editor online, collaborative text editor online. So it's a very simplified version of this, and LibreOffice uses Etherpad extensively for our meetings. So we would probably dog food LibreOffice Online for that use in the future. So, yeah, in the back there.
I was wondering, first off, great tool, love it.
Okay.
I finished my dissertation last year using LibreOffice. A lot of clients were trying to me in my particular. I won out. Anyway, I wanted to ask specifically, is it possible through LibreOffice Online to create something like a presentation, like a slide presentation?
Yes.
And maybe link it to a website so that they can do it only, kind of like slide shares or some functionality like that.
Yeah, so you're asking, would it be possible to sort of create a self-contained presentation you could view online? Is that? Yeah. Right, so it would just be like an autoplay presentation kind of thing, is what you're asking. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So that's basically exactly the kind of question or suggestion that I'd like to hear from people, because I'm continuously looking to the future for LibreOffice. So as I mentioned earlier, LibreOffice has this decades-long history, And that can be good and that can be challenging. And so, for example, LibreOffice was first created by a German company. It's just historically now we have a German nonprofit, and we have tons of German comments. And there's this interesting asymptotic line as the number of German comments slowly goes down. And I kind of don't ever want it to end. But the point is that we are always continuously working on improving pieces, and I think that for LibreOffice to not only succeed, to exist, I guess, but to really prosper, we need to do things like implementing new features, again, like sort of self-contained presentation that someone can view. Now, the thing from my perspective is that I'd love for people who view a presentation, as you said, it's sort of embedded presentation online. It'd be great for people to then be able to take that content and edit it and manipulate it and work on it in the future. I think that one of the things about a lot of applications online, a lot of tools online that other companies offer that are not open source is that they are just such silos of information and so locked down. And so as much as I encourage people to use LibreOffice, as much as I promote this software, I really would like us to also investigate ways for people to take data that's in a LibreOffice Online environment, LibreOffice Online, and then extract that and use it elsewhere. Right? I really want to make sure they're not locked into LibreOffice. I think that it's great, and I'd like for people to stay there because we're good, not because they can't do something else. So with the presentations, I think it would be great, and again, they can right now if they're viewing a presentation online, for them to be able to again export that to HTML. I think might still be a Flash exporter, and so forth, so that they can take that content that's embedded in a blog, as you said, and we're not just linking them to something static. We're linking them to something that they have more ability to manipulate. So, yep.
Is there any plans to implement anything like email or contact or calendaring? That's one of the things that blocks me from being able to suggest LibreOffice to my company.
Right. So the question is there any goal of implementing email, contacts, and calendaring within this? And I believe that there's interest from a lot of different parties in that. I think one of the challenges, again, sort of going back to having people be able to take their data out of the system and use other pieces, is that it would be more complicated, obviously, to have additional components for email, for calendaring, and so forth. I remember when you had Thunderbird and Lightning and all these other components, and I know that there were some issues getting all those pieces to work together, and I think there were like resource questions, about how much energy was being put into each one of them, and in some ways having different groups, focusing on one can be better. I mean, we already have several components within LibreOffice, from the math component to the base component, draw, and so forth, plus your writer, your impress, and calc. So I think it would be great to have integration with that, and but even if we were to implement something ourselves, I would really again be hopeful that we made it extremely easy for people to plug in other tools as well, because in our sort of community manifesto and so forth, one of our critical pieces is making sure that people can access their data and edit it and manipulate it and share it in their own language. So that's partially why we put so much emphasis on translations and so forth, but also on making sure that data is accessible. Here and then in the back. Yes.
For a long time now, I've been waiting until it became super easy to connect the base portion of LibreOffice with Postgres.
Okay.
Has that been taken care of yet? Or?
So you're asking how easy is it to connect base with a Postgres database, PostgreSQL? I know it's possible. I don't know how complicated it is right now. If I remember correctly, there were some connector components you needed for different databases. Typically, I have I don't personally use the base component very much. I mostly just connect directly to databases, from other programs. But if there's a specific concern you have, a question, then I can talk to you in person afterwards. So, Oh, okay, yeah. So one actually interesting things is that if anyone here speaks German, or any other language, I want to talk to you, but especially German, there's heavy use of the base component in Germany, and in fact our best documentation is in German. In contrast to most of our documentation starting in English and then being translated to other languages, the base documentation starts in German and gets translated to English. So if anyone here would like to volunteer and help us speed up that translation, that would be great, and that might help you, again, connect Postgres to base more quickly. So, does that make sense? You had a question in the back there? Yeah.
So I use LibreCalc to do bill of materials sorting.
Mm-hmm.
I would really like if there's a project directory that I can just open up PDF stuff in a data sheet. Is there a way to do that? I've been trying to do that.
Sorry, so you create like a bill of sale, you said, right? Bill of materials, right? Okay. And then in Calc, and then you wanted to. So you want to link those into the document, or I'm sorry, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, so I believe that you can embed a number of different types of documents within an open document format file, like an ODS file can have other documents embedded into it. And I mean, would your hope be that they would be embedded in the document physically, or just in like in a directory? You see what I'm saying, or? Yeah, I mean, so you could probably link to them within that particular directory as long as you're managing things on a directory by directory basis. Otherwise, again, I believe the open document, the ODF document, so like ODS for spreadsheet, for Calc, you could perhaps embed that PDF in there in the file directly, if necessary. Yeah.
Is the linking with, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Kind of following up.
Yeah, sure.
Linking with relative paths, or if you want to
Yeah.
keep it and be able to give it to somebody?
Yeah, well, so open document format files are actually a zip file, right? So you can actually go in and tweak them, change the content.xml file and so forth by hand, which is fun and exciting, but don't do it the day before your presentation. No, this one's okay. But in fact, OXML files, so Microsoft's sort of competitor to open document format, works the same way. It's a zip file with XML inside it. So that's one way. Again, you can take a look what's in there in terms of thumbnails and so forth. But yeah, I mean, you could have relative paths or not. But yeah, here. Yeah.
Looks like you could write some.
Yeah.
How many of them are really tightly coupled to what LibreOffice is able to handle in the way of input and output file format? Is there anything out there now on Android that's intended, in your opinion, to be able to compatibly write DocX or XLSX or PowerPoint equivalent, or are we still kind of waiting on that?
Yeah, so what we have right now in terms of LibreOffice is we have a viewer, so you can view content, and I believe, I can look back at the bug reports, I believe that right now you should be able to open up presentations. Yes, I was going to say, so you can read all that content. My battery doesn't die here. You can then make minor edits to those text. With the viewer, the current builds of it up on the Google Play Store or an F-Droid and so forth, you can make minor edits to those files and then output them. Now, a good question, something I haven't tested myself, is if you have, say, like a PPTX file, PowerPoint OXML file, and you go in and make minor changes to the text, save it on Android, is that still a correctly formatted file? I would believe so. Again, the same guts are being used in that LibreOffice for Android code as we're using in the LibreOffice desktop version. But, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do any of them, to your knowledge, compatibly create, edit the files that LibreOffice on a computer, regular computer can do, or is it still kind of a ways off?
mean, there are differences. So we haven't implemented everything that the desktop version of LibreOffice does. We haven't implemented all those feature sets. Like if you try to do, again, there's no button to do it, but if you tried to call out, the code probably isn't even there to say do a mail merge on Android, although I would challenge you to try. And it'd be kind of interesting, I guess, with all your contacts. But the thing is that, again, my guess is that if you are editing, again, like a presentation, so if I took my presentation, and so if I took my presentation and put it on my phone, right, and then went in and changed some text in it, I believe that it would then have those saved edits. I could take it back to my desktop, and that would be a fully correct and valid ODP file. So, I mean, does that answer your question? Is that, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, again, my personal preference, my thought, I generally don't edit files on my mobile device. I mean, the screen is tiny, and the interface is horrible. I miss my phone with physical buttons because I could text and make changes in the dark and without really looking. I mean, I'm a touch typist, right? So I really appreciate that interface, and I feel like I make so many more mistakes with a non-tactile sort of feedback device. But for those people who do feel like they want to use a mobile interface, you know, I think that there probably is a market for that, and I would love to see LibreOffice for Android Viewer, and again with some little beta editing tools in it right now, for that to expand. But I think that we're really going to have to think about how to correctly create a useful interface, because unless our devices get larger than this or our fingers shrink, we're going to be in trouble. So, question in the back. What's the best merge open document files? That's a great question. KDiff3, so that's a joke. It's a text merging tool, and so this would of course imply that you'd unzip the files and merge them. So yeah, I mean, in terms of merging content, I've actually used flat ODT for that previously. So if you guys use open document files and you have a version control system for storing different versions of files, changes to them, you can save in one of the corresponding flat versions of open document. So like .fodt is flat open document text, .fods is flat open document spreadsheet, and then you can save it and diff it to a certain extent, you know, in that fashion. So I have merged some changes using that. It's tricky, and again, for things like binaries, I mean, it's complicated. But I mean, I guess I, to a certain extent, have to know, you know, what kinds of changes you're merging and so forth. You know, there are things, again, in a sort of competing sphere to version control is using like track changes and so forth. So there's a diff stack in the file. I was talking with Bradley Kuhn probably a year or two ago, and he asked if you could get, if there was a tool to convert open document change tracking, so a list of changes with information, to a stack of commits, like bit commits. And I thought that would be really cool, but I haven't had time to implement that yet. So if any of you guys would like a little project and you want to make Bradley happy, I mean, who doesn't want to make Bradley Kuhn happy? He's an awesome guy and works on a whole bunch of really important projects at the Software Freedom Conservancy, among other places. Then again, please chat with me, because I think, again, this is another, I think, aspect. The more that we can make it easy for people to hack on open document files, then the more expressive people can be, and the better control people have over their data, you know, for merging and so forth. So. Yeah. Yes, there is some, I think, work there, and perhaps we're going to see some improvements to merging, you know, when that lands, because the goal is for that to land, you know, not just in the online version, but in the desktop as well, because same code base, yes. So, excellent. Any other questions, people? I think we're nearing the end of the time. thank all of you. You've been a great audience. If you have any other questions, if you want to volunteer, specifically if you are deploying LibreOffice in the United States right now, I'd love to hear about your success stories. If you're an educator, I'd love to put you in contact with other educators who are using LibreOffice in the classroom or thinking about having their classroom participate in maybe working on documentation or QA or other projects together as part of your curriculum. You can find me here or back at the LibreOffice booth for the next couple hours. So go out there and do awesome things with LibreOffice.
Thank you.